7. Okay, everybody. Misty Williams here with you. Ritamarie, say your last name again because I keep butchering it.
Oh, yeah, it's Loscalzo. It's Italian.
Loscalzo.
Yeah.
Yes. Dr. Ritamarie is so much easier. I'm just going
to. It's easier. That's why I don't make people say my last name.
Yes. I'm super excited for this live. We were just having a conversation before we started here about the work that she's doing around insulin resistance and hypothyroidism and really helping people get to the root cause of why they're struggling with thyroid issues. And more importantly, for a lot of women, why are we struggling with weight as we get older? This is like an epidemic. Tons of women in the Healing Rosie community are posting about their challenges around this topic. And there's a lot of solutions that are presented in our space. Some women are able to do something like the keto diet and really like finally find the thing that's going to help them peel off the pounds. My cousin did keto and lost a ton of weight with keto. I think she said she lost like 60 or 80 pounds and then kind of plateaued and quit losing for a while. My sister is doing keto right now and is loving it. I believe she's lost about 30 pounds of her baby weight. Then other women do the keto diet and it's like their energy bottoms out. Some women actually gain weight on keto. It's not so predictable as it's made to seem. And I would say it's not as predictable for women as it seems to be for our male counterparts. I know lots of guys who've done keto, and the only real complaint that I hear from my guy friends about keto is how they're feeling if they're not getting enough electrolytes. That's about all there is. So, keto is one way that women lose weight. Other women have been able to, go on an autoimmune protocol and do an elimination diet and really start losing weight that way. And then others, will start working on their thyroid and fix their thyroid and lose weight. And almost all of those women in the various scenarios can try one of these modalities and lose weight for a while. And then we hit a wall and it's like, okay, I was able to lose like the obesity part, but now I want to lose this last 10 or 20 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Against a wall.
It's just like,
yes, I'm super excited for us to talk about this. And one of the things that comes up a lot in our community is hypothyroidism. And many, many women are finding out that they're hypo. Many women that come to our community knew already that they were hypothyroid, and they're really trying to figure out how to optimize their thyroid, which, we can do with Cytomel and natural desiccated thyroid and those kinds of things in the short term. But the question begs, it always comes up of what do I do so I don't have to take this medicine forever? Exactly. And what is underneath all of it that's causing my thyroid to kind of go off the rails? So this is where I would love for us to start this conversation, because I know lots of women relate to the challenges of losing weight and, of course, maintaining our energy and having really great clarity of thought. These are things that most of us enjoyed when we were younger, and they seem to be fading as we get older. So Dr. Ritamarie, take it away. Why are so many women struggling around this whole weight topic?
That's great intro. And there are a lot of reasons, I think. And when I was back in school, we had a textbook, Robin's textbook of pathology medicine, internal medicine, whatever it was. And they talked about hypothyroid as this rare thing that you weren't going to see very much in clinical practice. Now, fast forward like 40, 50 years from when that book was written, right. And that epidemic, like hypothyroidism is a household word. There's not one single person that doesn't know one or more or multiple people or are themselves suffering from low thyroid function. And low thyroid function is just one of the contributing factors to the weight and the persistent weight and the lack of it. But it always begs, like you said, the question, why is the thyroid not functioning well? It's just not like, it just suddenly decides, hey, I think I'm going to take a break today, right? There's a lot of things that go into it. And in looking at it from a medical perspective, oh, your thyroid numbers are off. And we can talk about the horrificness of the testing because it's just not catching most of them that are really off. And then just like, here's Synthroid. That's typically the way it goes. And if that doesn't work alone, we'll give you some Cytomel to go with it. But they're never asking why. And even in functional medicine circles, I see this mentality a lot, the this for that. Oh, we're not going to give you Synthroid for your thyroid problem. We're going to give you desiccated thyroid or Armor or Nature Throid or any of a number of new ones that have come on the market. It's still the same approach, right? It's addressing the symptoms, and sometimes that does need to be addressed, especially if you've got super high levels of TSH, if you've got super low levels of thyroid numbers. You need to address it so that you at least feel better. But we never want to stop when we address just symptoms. We always want to go why. Because if you just address the symptoms, where else would the underlying why come out in your life, in your health, in your heart health, your ability to fight cancer, your immune system, autoimmune? All of these things need to be taken into account, because if we don't address the underlying cause, it's still burning and it's going to attack you somewhere else. Maybe not immediately, but give it a few months or a few years. So going back to the weight thing, when women are carrying extra weight, I'm going to say specifically women because you have a community that's majority women, right? Right. So when women are struggling with excess weight, you know, they're told you eat too much, you don't exercise enough, right? And so we find that just eating less and exercising more doesn't do it for a lot of women. Yeah, it does for some. Addressing the thyroid and going on medication will often create that immediate, oh, I dropped the extra weight, and then there's the plateau, right? So there's other things. One of the things that's not taken into account is a hormone called insulin. We don't hear about it very much except in diabetics, right? Diabetics need to be concerned about insulin, and they need to inject themselves with it if they don't make enough. But that's where it stops in many cases. Insulin is what's called an anabolic hormone. Insulin stores fat. Simple as that. It either gets the sugar that you eat and takes it and puts it in the blood so that you can make energy from it, or it stores it as fat. But here's the thing that most people don't know. Insulin blocks the breakdown of fat in the body. So while insulin levels elevate in order to handle the food load, the stress load, the environmental load, and a whole bunch of other things, you can't burn fat. It like puts the brakes on burning fat. And so a lot of women are following the eat all day long, eat small meals all day long. What that means is that all day long, your levels of insulin are elevated and fat burning is thwarted. Then they're told, take a snack before you go to bed to make sure that you don't wake up in the middle of the night with low blood sugar. Again, what happens then is it elevates the insulin and then depresses another hormone called growth hormone. And what does growth hormone do? It burns fat and it stores lean. So if you're at the gym working out and you want broken down your muscle and now want to build it, growth hormone's your friend. But insulin blocks growth hormone. So if you just went to the gym and then you come back and you're eating every 2 or 3 hours like you've been told, the growth hormone doesn't get to do its job. And then if you eat right before you go to sleep, the growth hormone doesn't allow you to burn fat while you sleep. Wouldn't we all like to be burning fat while we sleep? Mm-hmm. That's what's normal. That's what we need to restore back. So we really need to address the thyroid. Yes, we need to address the insulin. We also need to address the stress, because guess what? There's tigers chasing most of us 24/7. And they're not real tigers that actually make us run and burn calories. They're like the fake tigers, right? The news, the financials, the boss you can't stand, the kid that's flunking out of high school, the mother whose health is ailing, whatever those stresses might be for you, they're causing your adrenals to produce a hormone called cortisol. And guess what cortisol does to you? It causes you to get prepared to run away from a tiger. And what that means is it shuts down digestion, and it increases heart rate and increases respiration rate, and causes us to find stored fuel and put it in the bloodstream so that you have it and you can run away from the tiger. Mm-hmm. But guess what? It doesn't usually do it from the fat stores, unfortunately. It does it from either the glycogen in the liver or more preferentially from protein stores. Like it'll break down muscle, turn it into sugar and put it in the blood.
And why is that? Why is there a preference for glycogen and muscle stores over fat stores? And
I don't think anybody knows. We just look at the different hormonal systems and the different mechanisms. I mean, without having a degree in biochemistry and looking at that, I don't even know that anybody knows why, but we've just looked at that. Like the hormone glucagon, which is like the cousin of insulin. So insulin is supposed to lower blood glucose levels. Glucagon says, oops, you got too low, let's go high. The normal mechanism is when the pancreas is working right and the glucagon goes, hey, liver, give me some of that stored sugar you stored a little while ago. But the cortisol, maybe it's because of it takes longer. I don't know exactly. But what we've seen is that the cortisol causes the breakdown of muscle more. It will definitely do glycogen, but it usually goes to the muscle in breaking down glycogen, which is stored sugar, but also breaking down protein. And so what we see, you may have seen this in your community, and you guys may be experiencing this, is that as we age, you're like, I don't weigh any different, but my legs are skinnier and my belly's bigger. Have you ever seen that? It happens a lot. It's because a lot of that's happening because we're going into midlife, into later years with so much stress, years and years and years of it, that our body's preferentially done that. So we have to look at all of these factors. We can't just look at fix the thyroid. And then the gut plays a huge role. There's actually a balance of gut microbiome. That word has been thrown around a lot lately. When I first started in practice 25, 30 years ago, nobody knew what that was. We didn't talk about microbiome. We talked about gut flora. But it's like, wow, probiotics, what are those? And now everybody's into this. But there's actually in the gut, some of the bacteria will actually make us more efficient at breaking down the fuel that we give it and storing it for later. And then there's other bugs which make us just, do a normal process with it. So we call these the firmicutes are the names, that class. We call those the fat ones, right? Those trigger us to become heavier if we have a more out of balance there. So gut health is super important, right? And stress contributes to poor gut health because it turns off the digestive tract, because you don't want to be digesting the last meal you ate while you're running away from a tiger. You want to just run away from the tiger. So everything's set up in the body for safety, for keeping us alive. So all these things factor in to that. And then, liver health, how much are you loading your liver with toxicity from stressful thoughts, toxicity from environmental toxins, pollution, etc. So we have to look at all of these factors when we're looking at why are we not losing weight. And the biggest one that I think is overlooked, that I see in my experience and being in practice over 25 years, is that when we address the insulin issues, people go, oh, wow, look at that. I just had somebody write in the other day how she'd been trying for years, and she just thought, that's what happens as I get old. I'm just getting a little pudgy around the middle. And she started on my program, and she's like 20 pounds down. She has her figure back, and she's like, I never knew I was insulin resistant. It never occurred to me.
So why don't you help us understand how to assess if we're insulin resistant? How would we know if we're insulin resistant? Is this something showing up in our labs, something showing up in our symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and definitely shows up in symptoms. It shows up in labs if you know how to request the right labs, because your average doc is just going to look at your fasting glucose and say, honey, you're fine. You don't have a blood sugar problem. And that's not true, because that fasting glucose is the last thing to change. So there's a very easy way to test. I'm going to give you three. One is insulin. You actually look at your insulin levels, and years, even decades before we actually start to show the signs that the docs are looking for, which, by the way, by the time they see that high fasting glucose, you're almost diabetic, almost. Right. We don't want to wait till we're almost diabetic, because for decades, all the crazy damaging things that happen to diabetics, like losing their sight, losing their limbs, losing kidney function, and of course, gaining weight, all of those things are happening for decades before. Insulin goes up many, many years. In fact, I've seen it decades before it actually would show up. on a fasting glucose. So we can measure an insulin test. You can ask your doctor to do it. You can go to any number of direct access labs to do that. And I've got an educational series coming up that has a booklet that I give people that says, here's your lab testing document. Take this to your doctor and say, I want these tests. And then there's another.
What do you want to see on your insulin lab?
I personally want to see it between 2 and 5, ideally between 2 and 3, right? If it goes above 5, I think it's getting in the danger zone. Now, the lab ranges go up to 12.
Yeah.
But we know that the lab ranges, if you've been, in this community for a while, you talk about those lab ranges, the same with thyroid. We miss most of the cases of people with issues with thyroid because the doctors are looking at the wrong ranges. They're looking at the average range, which says, oh, we have this unhealthy population and 95% of them are in this range. So if you're in that range, you're okay. And I say, no, no, I would be the ideal. What are the ideal healthy average people? So those people are in the 2 to 3 range on insulin, fasting insulin.
What about HbA1c?
Hemoglobin A1c, I like to see it between 4.5 and 5. Okay. And the cutoff in medicine is like 5.6. And above that, you're considered insulin resistant. But I like to see it between 4.5 and 5. If it's starting to creep up, you're heading towards the full-blown insulin resistance. But I actually teach people about a condition I call pre-insulin resistance. It's those years and decades before you actually become insulin resistant that if you catch it then, holy cow, you can make so much headway and prevent so many dangerous things. And I just had somebody I spoke to yesterday who was full-blown diabetic, had the neuropathies, his feet were awful. He did terribly. He's lost over 100 pounds. He's, doing this great diet. And he said to me, my hemoglobin A1c is 4.8. I'm like, yay, way to go. This is so great. It was 11 or 12
right,
way back when.
Right. So you want to see your hemoglobin A1c at 5.0 or below. I would say that's probably the easier way to say it. Talk to us a little bit about insulin resistance and exactly what that is for those that may not understand it.
Yes, absolutely. So insulin is this very necessary hormone. Like all hormones, too much of it causes a problem. Hormones are not like, just give more and more and more and you're going to be fine. No. There's this range. So insulin is a hormone that takes sugar after we eat a meal. The meal gets metabolized into carbohydrates, sugars, fats, fatty acids, and amino acids, and that gets put into the bloodstream. Well, the job of insulin is to take that glucose out of the bloodstream and put it in the cells, and then the cells then are our powerhouses. They have these things called mitochondria, and they make us energy. Very simple process. If we consistently eat foods that cause a rapid rise in glucose, like our typical American diet, loaded with breads and pastas and sugars, and soft drinks and all sorts of things. There's so much sugar in people's lives that they don't even think, I don't add sugar to anything, but there's so much hidden sugar in their diet. That causes a rapid rise in the glucose. The pancreas, which secretes insulin, detects that and produces insulin, but it doesn't produce enough insulin to break that big a load. So it produces more and it produces more and it keeps producing more until it gets to the point where there's enough insulin to get that fat stored. Some of it goes into the blood, the actual cells, but most of it ends up going into fat cells. So as the insulin goes, let's just take this and let's make fat. Let's store it later for fat. And that's where we start to get bigger and bigger, even though we may not be eating so many extra calories, but it's the composition of the calories we are eating. A lot of people say, I don't eat sugar, but are you eating bread? Are you eating pasta? Are you eating rice? There's a lot of foods that quickly convert to sugar. Mm-hmm. And then after a while, the cells go, enough. Insulin is damaging. Enough. They put it there and they're like, I can't do it anymore. And then the cells won't actually take the glucose in, and then we just get fatter and fatter.
Mm-hmm. A few years ago, I read Rob Wolf's book, Wired to Eat, which I thought was an excellent read. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I haven't.
In his book, he actually talks about how we all are going to process food differently and react to food differently. And he recommends, I think he calls it the 7-day food test or something like that, where you consume 50 grams of a given carb at one sitting and then test your blood sugar in 30 minutes and then again in 2 hours to see what your numbers are. And the idea is that by doing this testing, you'll find out what your body is metabolizing well and what is actually triggering an excessive insulin response in you. Yep. So he recommends, that we just get a blood glucose meter that you can pick up at Walmart.
Oh, you can pick it up anywhere. I have one here somewhere.
And start testing yourself. So I know that you do some similar things with recommending testing. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
I will. Yeah, I think it's great to have one of these meters. And I think that, what I teach people, I don't actually have them do the 50-gram load of carbohydrate, because the people I'm seeing are like, I don't want to do that to their system. I say, what is it that you're currently eating? Because if they're having the problem, it's something they're currently eating. So I actually first start with have them just test their regular meals. Just test your regular meals. Take your glucose before and then take your glucose. Usually when we're first starting, I have them tested every 15, 20 minutes, because everybody's a little different at when their glucose curve peaks, right? And so somewhere between a half an hour and an hour, but we want to see where that peak is and when they start coming down. And once they've established that it's, it happens at the same time, no matter what they're eating, they go for it. And I like to look at how high does it go. At 2 hours, and this is where I will argue with anybody that talks about this, at 2 hours, it should be back down to normal. In the diabetic circle, they say at 2 hours, it should be lower than 140. I'm saying don't ever let it get above 140, because that's where all the damage is happening. So wherever the peak is, you want it back down to pretty much baseline. Before you ate, it was 85. At 2 hours, it should be 85. If you just test at 2 hours and say, oh, I'm fine because it's 85, you've missed the gems of the information, because the gem is what's happening in that 2 hours. How high is it going? How quickly is it coming down? For people who have some tendencies towards hypoglycemia, which, they say they get shaky, I want to see if they really have hypoglycemia. And then I'll go out for 3 hours or 4 to see if it drops below where it started, which could be an indication that that's usually when there's too much insulin. So I like to see that curve, and my number is 110. Now, some people I see are already like they're starting at 110. They're insulin resistant. So we say that you shouldn't be eating foods that cause your numbers to go more than 20, 25, 30 at the most, but like 20 points up. Right? And then we put them on a reset. And the reset is where they've identified the foods that raise their glucose. They've identified the foods that keep them safe and steady. And then for 30 days, we're just doing that. And that helps the insulin receptors to heal and become more sensitive again.
Something that comes up a lot in our community, and I know is an important part of your work too, is addressing sleep. There's many women who are struggling on the sleep front. And there's several things that get a lot of airtime in our community because it seems to really work for women. One of them is obviously doing the amber glasses, as soon as the sun goes down, really managing your circadian cycles, your exposure to blue light. We talk quite a bit about amino acids and amino acid therapies and how that might be able to help with sleep. I personally am a fan on those nights when I don't seem to be able to stay asleep, which for me happens every few months. I might have a night like that. I use CBD. I've had great luck with that. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about sleep and help people understand the role that sleep plays in all of this and why it's so important to get your sleep dialed in?
Absolutely. And, there's two groups of people I see here, the people who can't sleep and the people who won't sleep. Right. And the people who won't sleep are I have too much to do and they stay up real late. They deliberately just have a short night of sleep. Then there's the people who are having difficulties. For the people who are just staying up, it's an easy solution. You got to go to bed. You've just got to go to bed, because sleep is so important, especially if you're struggling with weight and hormone issues. It's super important. While we sleep, there's a great book. I'm in the middle of listening to it on audiobook. I love it. It's called Why We Sleep. Matthew Walker. Highly recommend it, because I'm one of the ones that won't sleep. I have too much to do and I have plenty of energy and I just don't want to do it. And now he's convinced me I've got to sleep. I've always known about insulin resistance and how the insulin resistance is affected by lack of sleep. One night of bad sleep, multiple studies confirm, one night of bad sleep in an otherwise healthy person with normal insulin, no insulin resistance, causes insulin resistance the next day. So the first thing I tell people is if you're forced to stay up because you had a sick kid or, dealing with something overnight, be really careful how you eat. Just eat salad the next day, salad and avocado, just stick to that the next day because you're not going to handle sugars or starches at all. So sleep on a chronic sleep deprivation basis leads people to have this state that I call pre-insulin resistance, teach them how to assess that, leading to insulin resistance, diabetes, and all the dangers related to it. So we really need to sleep to keep that. But there's so many other things that happen while we sleep because the repair happens. The liver is able to go in and detoxify from the day. The brain, there's brain pruning that happens. There's all sorts of things. So that book is on
when you're sleeping.
What's that?
All your hormones are made when you're sleeping.
Yeah, there's this balance that happens. So you get a dysregulation of two hormones that are key when it comes to weight loss is leptin and ghrelin. And leptin is the one that says, hey, we're good. We don't need to eat anymore. Ghrelin says, hey, we're empty. We need to eat. And lack of sleep causes leptin to go down and ghrelin to go up. So guess what? On days after you don't sleep well, you just can't get satisfied. There's just, I need to eat. I need to eat. I need to eat is happening. So it's super important to sleep. So then if you can't get to sleep, I'm again, like with the thyroid, looking for why. Why can't you get to sleep? So is there a hormonal imbalance? Are you watching TV late at night? Are you watching the news right before you go to bed? That's hyperstimulating. It gets your adrenals going. It gets your cortisol up. And cortisol is an awakened hormone, right? Then there's all the things that interfere with melatonin. So you mentioned the glasses, so that light that we have coming into our retinas, but we live in this world where we have artificial light. It's a blessing and it's a curse. Right. So after the sun actually goes down, there are a few things you can do to stimulate your melatonin production, like staying away from it. I mean, if you're going to do it, use the glasses, but the best is just don't watch TV or don't use the computer within 2 hours of going to bed. Not eating too close to bedtime, because once you start eating again, it raises your cortisol, lowers your melatonin, and that's not going to work. Right. Having a bath a couple hours before bed can sometimes lower the core temperature. But with the melatonin, is like at home, why don't you make it romantic? Have candlelight, use candlelight or low dim lights, and do calming things before going to bed if you're having trouble sleeping. Some people don't have any trouble falling asleep and don't need to do all this hygiene. And I have, I teach people, I have hours and hours and hours of videos that I teach my health practitioners in our practitioner training courses on how do you work with people who are having difficulties. So is it a hormonal thing? If the levels of cortisol tend to be dysregulated and they're high at night, there are some herbs and supplements that you can do to help support it, like phosphatidylserine, magnolia, things like that, to bring that level down. But again, then you want to go backwards and say, why is this out of balance? And sometimes doing some testing to see what those rhythms look like is really important. Neurotransmitters, right? You mentioned amino acids. Those are precursors to neurotransmitters. If you have bad digestion and you're not really breaking down your protein well and turning it into amino acids, you can have amino acid deficiencies. If you're eating refined foods or not focusing on getting B vitamins, you can have a vitamin B6 deficiency. And then your body's unable to make serotonin and melatonin to help you fall asleep. So sleep is a huge issue. And it's something that I address with people when I'm working with them in our groups, because it's so important and it is unique. Like you said earlier, like each person, you have to tease it apart. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another.
Mm-hmm. So you have a melt away belly fat food checklist. I would love for you just to talk to us a little bit about the role that food is playing in this, because this guide really teaches us a way to flatten bellies, clear brain fog, it's amazing to me the role that food can play in so many of the symptoms that we're experiencing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so food is food, right? It's nourishment. If you don't have the right foods, you either get a buildup of toxicity, you overload your system, you don't get enough of the nutrients that you need. So this melt away belly fat list is a list of common foods and how they affect insulin receptors. So how do you improve your sensitivity to insulin? And then how do you decrease your need for so much insulin? So the beginning part, most of the book is devoted to little pictures of these foods, and they're common foods, and some of them, like chocolates, in that list, avocados in that list. One of my favorite foods to make from that is chocolate avocado mousse. So you can do this, and you can sweeten it with the non-caloric sweeteners like stevia or lohan or erythritol or things like that. So this list is like, oh, let me see which of these I can incorporate into my diet on a regular basis to help improve the integrity of my insulin receptors. And at the end, there's a short list of, these are the things you need to avoid to do this. So that's what that checklist is about. Food is medicine. Food is medicine. It's, Hippocrates said that ages ago. It's the original medicine, and we shouldn't have to be relying on these synthetic things that are created in a lab to jerry-rig our symptoms that are caused by poor food intake. Let's just go back and clean up the food intake and find what's best for you.
Yeah. Well, this is a really important conversation. I don't feel like we talk enough about insulin and insulin resistance and the role that it's playing in a lot of the issues that we're experiencing. We definitely give a lot of airtime to thyroid and hormones and those things because I think they're we're closer to them as far as in our ability to relate to them because of the symptoms we're experiencing. But it's so important that we're going deeper as you're describing here and really looking at the root cause and what's happening with our insulin. So thank you so much, Dr. Ritamarie. We're including a link for you guys to go download that checklist in the status here. If you're watching on Facebook, we'll also include it in the description on YouTube. And I hope you guys will avail yourself of all the resources that Dr. Ritamarie offers. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye.